Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our fourth and final Practitioner Insights events for this summer. My name is Jen Handy, and I am SHEP's Director of Grants and Engagement. I've enjoyed having the opportunity to meet with community leaders all summer, doing frontline anti-poverty work and hearing about their current work and the paths that led them to where they are today. Tonight, we have the honor of hearing from Juan Gonzalez. He works with one of our SHEP community partners, Life Pieces to Masterpieces in Washington, D.C. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so Juan serves as a curriculum and education consultant for Life Pieces to Masterpieces. And before that, let me see if I can get all of this right. He served in AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps and was a Fulbright Scholar. And I know that many of our interns in our programs are considering at least one of these programs. You managed to do all of them. So it is a treat to hear directly from an alum for these programs. So welcome. And can you start off by telling us a little bit more about the work happening at Life Pieces to Masterpieces and more specifically your role within the agency?
Right. So actually, I recently just got promoted to assistant director of programs. So that's something that I'm recently celebrating. But yeah, so I work at Life Pieces to Masterpieces, which is a nonprofit in the 7th and 8th wards of Washington, D.C. Our program has a bunch of different components, but I specifically work with the programs and educations piece. So what I do is help run an after-school program during the academic year, a full-day summer program or summer camp during the summer, as well as parent and community programming, and also parent and community support. Our program is for boys and young men from the ages of 3 to adulthood. So our after school program is for 3 to 14. And then we have a Saturday high school program. In the summer, we have everyone there. And then we also have a program called Brothers in Power that's for our college age apprentices, which is what we call our participants. So a lot of what we do is just create a space for the boys and young men to be able to express themselves, to be able to show their creative sides, and really to redefine what it means to be a man, what manhood means and brotherhood means in a lot of different ways. So originally our organization is 27 years old. We were originally founded with arts at the center, and now arts is still a lot of what we do, but we also do STEM, and we also do a bunch of other different things because we've expanded over the 27 years. But we are originally an arts founded organization, which for the majority of the time has served predominantly Black boys and young men, where now we have Black and brown boys and young men that are part of our organization. I think that's mainly what you want me to share, right? At least for now.
Yeah, so that helps about the organization. So I think some of us are new to kind of the jargon of job titles. So
Right.
what is a curriculum and education consultant? Obviously, you've now have a promotion.
Right.
What really is that?
Right. So when I started at Life Pieces 3 years ago, so I've been with them for 3 years. My first year, I was a out of school time manager. So I basically was like the after school program and summer program coordinator. So I helped the teachers and stuff like that. And then because of that connection that I made with this nonprofit, they when I did my Fulbright, which was in 2022, they actually allowed me to continue to work with them in a consultant role. And that's when I was basically writing curriculum for them while I was gone in Argentina, which is where I did my Fulbright grant. So I continued to work with the organization in more remote ways, like writing curriculum, leading trainings, helping with interviewing and recruitment and hiring and all of that stuff. And then when I returned back to fully in person, then that's basically when I came back into this assistant director role, which essentially is still doing a lot of what I was doing with running the after school programs, but now with more responsibilities of managing all of the people involved as well.
Great.
And yeah, this is also my third summer having a SHEP intern. So I've worked with I've worked with 4 SHEP interns since I've been at Life Pieces.
And you still came tonight, so that must mean it
Yes,
was pretty
yay.
good.
Yeah, no, they've always been, I mean, we have a lot of different, and this isn't just because I'm on the call. We have a lot of different internship programs from different universities and different things. And SHEP is always one of those that we can count on getting like a quality intern. And you know, my 3 summers that I've had SHEP interns, it hasn't changed. So keep them coming.
I bet that's not something that our current interns think about a lot, that they're kind of following in the footsteps of previous interns and
Right.
like how good they were and how much responsibility they felt, and that the next round will kind of build on their work, but also kind of build on that experience and trust. So
Right. And I would say also in DC, we've had 2 where that people who end up going to school in DC or staying in DC that we actually eventually give some kind of part-time paid role to. So you never know what connections come out of that.
that's awesome. So you mentioned some of the changes. So you had life pieces going from more art-centered and switching more to both like Black and brown boys and men. What are
Mhm.
some of the other changes you're seeing in your industry? I mean, I guess we often don't call our nonprofit focus an industry, but really it is. Like, what are some of the hurdles or kind of innovations happening in that realm?
Right. I mean, I think speaking personally for, you know, my experience with life pieces, um, we're seeing just a lot of changes and because obviously I wasn't there 27 years ago when they started it, but it was at a time where, you know, DEI or diversity and inclusion work was not at the center of everybody's priority list. From the stories I hear, it was more of a challenge to try to get funding, to try to get grants. That's why a lot of what the beginning of the organization was very small. You know, they had maybe the original class was like 7 apprentices, so 7 young men. Then eventually they added more and more to the programming. And now we're at a point where every school year we serve over 90 apprentices. And also, like, since I've started, there has been an influx of resources that are available. You know, ever since the things that were happening socially and politically in the country from 2020 till now have really changed the landscape of like people wanting to work with our kind of organization, and also just has included us in more of the diversity and inclusion conversations that are happening. Because another part of that our organization does is we have a component called Color Me Community, which is essentially is like a training program that other organizations can book us for. So we can do workshops, trainings, things like that. So it's definitely trying to find other ways to include the stories of our boys and young men in different spaces, which is ultimately the goal. So even if we're doing a training for a team or some corporate company, at the core of everything that we're doing and sharing is those experiences that are the foundation of what Life Pieces does.
Do you feel any tension between kind of people wanting to work with you and having ideas and giving funding and kind of trying to stay focused on a mission? I mean, so it's a great thing for all the resources to come in, but every once in a while it can be when you grow quickly or everyone wanting to work with you, or have you all been able to just kind of
Right,
make
and also, right, also as we're growing, we have the more we grow, the more you know, grants or income that comes in, the more people we have. So like, for example, I don't write grants, I don't report on grants because we have a grant team. So there's people who do all of that, like funding component, where I always say, you know, when I see them and they share the news of grants that we've got or things, I'm like, good, keep making the money so that I can spend it. Because as part of the programming team, it's like I'm leading efforts on paying for our camp, paying for this, paying for that. But I obviously, even from when I started till now, I'm seeing how much more we're able to do for our boys and their families because of how much more is available in the grant world for our specific type of work. Because you are seeing more people who want to, for whatever reasons, obviously, because I don't necessarily know, but I know sometimes there's like, okay, there's going to be funders who want to do a site visit. And I know that that means that they're going to engage with our boys in some way. They're going to take pictures, might take videos. And I know that sometimes, even though that might feel a little weird, it's part of the process of like getting those grants, giving them what they want, which is being able to show that they helped our type of organization, and then us being able to give back to our boys. And unfortunately, you're not always going to know like the people where the money's coming from, what are the full intentions, you don't know, right? But I think for me personally, someone who is like, you know, a few steps removed in my organization from that process, like what's important to me is being able to give our boys and their families the best possible program and services that we can.
So it sounds like you have to kind of trust that grant team, the development team, to kind of make sure people are coming in with good intentions, and then you work with them to kind of
Right.
protect the dignity of your participants. So you're honoring them and how you do it. Because there is that
Right.
tension and a lot of nonprofit of like, I want to show you the need, but I also don't want to make it into a show. Like these are real people
Right.
and real dignity. So there is a tension there of that dignity for humans of
Right. And we,
all things.
right.
Yeah.
And we have a very full, you know, it's for us, we have our own curriculum, first of all, called the Human Development System, which essentially is like how we teach our boys about different things. So we're not like a homework help program. We're more of like, we have a curriculum and we're trying to teach what it means to be a gentleman, a scholar, an athlete, an artist in different ways. For different types of people, because we recognize that not every one of our boys and young men is going to grow up to be the same type of man or to be a man, right? So it's important for us to be able to teach expression and to teach more, like break down those barriers of toxic masculinity and what it means to, like, you should be able to play basketball and do art or dance if you want to. So we provide all of those opportunities in one way or another for them to express themselves however they want as they're growing through our program. Because that's another thing about our program that is unique, that we have people who start at 3 years old and who are now in college working for us. So the people who have been there for a long time have literally seen these boys grown into men and then now come back and work with us. So it is very impactful to kind of hear the stories of like the high schoolers, for example, who have been in Life Pieces for 12 years and recognizing that we're not just an after school program. We're not just a summer camp for parents to like send their kids to be babysat. Like we're changing lives and we're really having a significant long lasting impact, not only on our boys, but on their families and the people that they're connected to. And eventually on the, you know, the universities and the friends and all of that stuff that they end up doing as well.
I feel like you might have already answered this one,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to ask it anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what our interns are figuring out this summer is, within their field, what kind of work kind of feeds their soul, what energizes them, what, even within a certain path, there's certain interactions that are especially rewarding to them. So what is one or some of the most rewarding kind of parts of your job that really kind of feed your soul to get up and do it again?
Right. I think for me, it's definitely, especially now being in a role that is, you know, a few places removed from the children, because I don't get to sit in a classroom and work with them directly anymore. But having the moments where I get to interact with them is it's a reminder of why, you know, I have to sit in certain meetings for a certain amount of time, or why I have to write certain reports, or why I have to do certain things. Because it's like every day at the beginning, like right now we're in the middle of our summer camp, 8 to 4 every day. So when I get there and see them in the morning as they're being dropped off, and I get to like hang out with them during their morning free play and have the little moments where I'm like just interacting, it reminds me of like, okay, this is why I'm here. And on the other side, when some of them come and, you know, I notice that maybe they don't have the clean clothes on, or I notice that maybe they look like they haven't slept a lot, or things like that, that's also a reminder of why I'm doing the work. So I think for me, it's important to be able to see them and interact with them, and not necessarily be like, you know, oh, I'm here to save them, but no, I'm here to give them the services and the space that they need. I'm here to even out the playing field and not necessarily allow them to fall into the cycle of like believing that they are what so much of society thinks they are.
So it sounds like those relationships keep you centered on why you're there.
Right.
You can't be in the day-to-day of each relationship kind of that specific connection rather than keeping it general
Right.
concepts of curriculum, whether you're doing the big curriculum meetings and the reports because of those interactions. Yeah.
Right. And I think using the, like, for example, when I was doing my Fulbright, I spent the whole year writing curriculum that I was passing on to the teachers to implement. And now that I'm here and I'm back, I'm taking the feedback not only from the teachers but from the children on like how some of those things worked or didn't work, because I think it's very important, especially as you move up in organizations, that you don't want to lose the voice of the people that you're doing it for. So it's like I might think that a certain activity or a certain thing is like, oh, this is perfect, this is how it should work. But then you put it into action and the boys aren't receptive to it, then that's something that I should be listening to, because ultimately I am for them, they're for them. So if something that I'm doing or thinking of doesn't work, then I have to be able to adjust based on their need.
Expertise comes in all ages.
Right. And I think,
What?
and for us, because we have, like I said, we have 6 classes in the summer. The youngest ones are 3 to 5, and they're so cute. And then you have the older ones that are like 13, 14, 15. And if you sit and talk to them, they will tell you what they think. And I think it's nice to see that range. And we also have something called junior mentors, which is where we have high schoolers that we pay in the summer to work in each of our classrooms as mentors. So even seeing them kind of go from like being in the class to then now having a work experience. And then the college students, we also pay them to come back and be teachers, because now they're like adults who are over 18. So it's nice to kind of see the whole cycle. And in one day, you're with so many different generations of life pieces, boys and young men. And it feels really special, honestly, just seeing how long lasting and how it just shapes the lives of so many of the people that work there.
So that was the good part.
Mhm.
What is the hardest part or most frustrating? Every job has it.
Mhm.
um and it could be not necessarily in general, just like to you, it's hard to be at a computer, or it can really
Right.
be anything.
I mean, I think it's hard sometimes to like not take the work home. And I think it's difficult, right? Because you're working with children and youth, and not just even the children, sometimes the adults who are going through some very difficult things. And as much as you at work, you're helping them, you're listening. And for me, so I also have a master's in counseling because my background is in university counseling. So it's not something that I can turn off. So if I'm talking to a child and they're unloading things on me, then I'm like trying to figure out how to best process and help and get the situation figured out as best as I can. But with children, there's an additional layer that you don't have with university children, which is parents, which is like families that have to be involved in whatever process you're in. So it is difficult to have a child that you, based on what you're seeing and hearing, think needs a certain resource or service, and then you have parents or adults who are not willing to do that, and that's very difficult. It's very hard to like balance that. And I think that that's for any of you or those of you that get into work that involves children, like that is one of those layers that is just hard to deal with, because ultimately like their parents have the final say in most of the situations.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit,
Mhm.
we often get to talk to people who have experience with like one program. And I think I mentioned earlier, like maybe someone did a Fulbright, maybe someone did AmeriCorps. And
Right.
let's see, you have semester at sea, Fulbright in Argentina, AmeriCorps NCCC, Peace Corps in Samoa, an MS in counseling. You it's like you had a bingo card and you've got it all. Um, so first of all, very impressive. But could you tell us a little bit about some of those programs, especially like your experience with AmeriCorps versus Peace Corps, which
Mhm.
should be very similar, domestic
Right.
versus international, really anywhere you want to go with that.
Right. And it sounds like I wish I was like, oh, I'm doing all of this so that I can get into an Ivy League school, or this is why I was doing all these things. And ultimately it wasn't. All of those things happened post grad school. So if anything, they were more of me providing myself with like exploration opportunities. Um, so just to give you all some background on like so I grew up pretty low income. So I wasn't able to travel when I was in high school or even most of my undergrad experience. So for me, it was like always about working and trying to get these experiences. And then finally, when I got my master's in counseling, working in university housing, university orientation. So I was like a student affairs person. Um, and I love doing that work, but I realized that there were so many other things. Like I had reached a point where I could stay in that role or in that job for like 40 more years and just retire and be done. But I realized that there was so much that I had so desperately wanted to do as a child growing up that I didn't allow myself to do because I was so centered on like work and school. So finally, when I got the job where I was able to make a certain amount of money and then I had the master's, I'm like, okay, I think that I deserve to like take a step back and take a break. But my break was going to the Peace Corps. So I went to Peace Corps in Samoa and I taught English there. And obviously it's a volunteer experience. So for the first time, I was able to afford that because not everyone can afford to just not work for 2 years. So I did that program. That's actually where I was March 2020. So I was part of the Peace Corps volunteers who were evacuated from countries and sent back to the US and like the drop of a hat, which was actually pretty traumatic because I had already been there almost 2 years. I had a little bit of time left, and one day to the next, we were gone. But then when I was in the US, I was at home with my parents after 10 years of not living with them. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And AmeriCorps was one of those programs that was still running because obviously, even though we had a pandemic, like people still needed help. Especially then because of a lot of the things that the pandemic made worse. So I joined AmeriCorps NCCC, which is a traveling service program where I was like the team leader, and I had 18 to 22-year-olds that I was leading on these service projects. And we did service. I worked at a food bank in Iowa, and then I worked at an outdoors organization in DC. So it was different projects. So then through AmeriCorps is actually how first met the nonprofit that I work for now. And it was all kind of connected. And during COVID, I had also applied for Fulbright, gotten the Fulbright, but it was on pause because Argentina was still closed to Americans. So I was at the nonprofit working when I found out that I could go to Argentina. And of course, everyone's like, you have to do it. It's a Fulbright. So then I went to Argentina and I was there and I taught English at a university. So most of my international experiences have been in the English language learning spaces. But what I liked about my Argentina experience, that it came full circle to my higher ed experience because I was working in a university in Argentina, teaching English to people who wanted to be teachers. So it kind of nicely tied everything in. And I say all of that to share that like, none of those pieces made sense to me as I was doing them. I was just kind of going with it. But once I got to Argentina and I was able to kind of like tie it all together, it was like, wow, I'm glad that I trusted my gut in some of those choices because I got to the point where I was able to use every single experience and thing that I had learned or done in this new opportunity. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I'm
yeah.
sure we'll have other questions about it, but it sounds like putting yourself in a place to trust yourself to be flexible.
Right.
We have some interns who come through who have a pretty clear vision of what they want to do and may end up doing exactly that subspecialty of medicine that they've always planned to do. We have some that come in. One of my favorite stories, I think I tell it almost every time, is we have an intern who went to Helena, Arkansas and was like, this is what I want to do. And he hated it. But every Friday, because it sounded good on paper, but the reality of it was just not it. But every Friday they were doing this other program with education and he loved it. And so sometimes learning what you hate doing is also important before you go all the way through law school or something else.
Right.
So just learning to kind of trust and to pivot on that good foundation. I think it's encouraging for those interns on this call who may still try and figure out what they want to do in their life, or us adults who may still want to know,
It makes, it makes sense. Because so when I was, just to add another thing, when I was in grad school, like they kept saying in student affairs, you earn your stripes by working in housing. And I was always like, I don't want to work in university housing because it's like a 24/7 type job. I don't know if any of you have been RAs or, understand the whole process, but it was like a lot. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to do it because it's free housing while I'm in grad school. And then all these years later, I was able to recently, this last spring semester, work on semester at sea. And one of the requirements to work on semester at sea is to have housing experience. So if I wouldn't have just done what, I thought was going to be hard, which it was, I wouldn't have been able to do this such a cool experience like semester at sea, where you're able to go to 11 countries and live on a ship for 4 months. And it's this really special experience. I don't know how many of you have heard of it or seen it, but it's something I definitely always recommend. But that's just an example of how sometimes it just comes full circle without you even planning for it to.
Yeah, I think also being open to what you can learn in each circumstance. Some interns I think are doing weirder things than they thought, or kind of more menial tasks, and what can you learn from it and from each interaction you have. We had a pre-med student last summer who put it really well, that when he got his placement with a food bank, he was like, what does this have to do with what I want to do with my life? And he stayed open-minded to it, and through it learned a lot about the ins and outs of both public health and the interaction of diet and nutrition and access to long-term health benefits. And he said it changed his entire mentality going into the medical profession on how he will interact with people. So, what seemed like a thing that had absolutely nothing to do with what he wanted to do, hopefully will, impact that. Okay, so before I get to questions, what advice would you give current interns as they have 2-ish more weeks left in an internship?
So advice for their internship?
Or just for them?
I mean, I would say definitely like trying to figure out how, now that you've been at your internship for a certain amount of time and a little bit more, trying to think what are the things that you haven't done or haven't heard about or asked about that you could still gain something from. So asking questions that you maybe have not asked, or things that you're curious about, or even if it doesn't necessarily have to do with your specific assignment at the internship, trying to get more of those resources, because knowledge is resources, right? So I think asking questions and making those connections, because you never know who you're going to see down the line, especially in certain sectors and certain industries. It is small, and so nonprofit world in DC is only so big. So being able to start that network, because both unfortunately and fortunately, we live in a world where networking is important, and who is important. And sometimes that might be the difference between you getting an opportunity over somebody else. So I think it's just important to see every experience as an opportunity to network, even if you don't see it in that moment as one. Because even this group that you're in is a network.
Yeah, so just a reminder, this is our 25th year of internships, and there's quite a great network of alums and community partners that have loved alums, to kind of support that. So when you say network, I have a suspicion that some people think that some people just love to connect on LinkedIn and kind of do small talk. Does anybody actually love that? So I'm sure some people do, but I feel like my advice is often that can't be an out that you don't like it. I think it's something you do, and everyone's faking liking it at least a little bit. Is that a fair?
Right. to be fair, I'm somebody who doesn't necessarily like when I was in undergrad, it was hard for me to drink the professionalism Kool-Aid, if that makes sense. Like I felt like, oh, they were trying to like force us to act a certain way and to do certain things. So I feel like I've always been somebody who, and I think naturally just being someone who grew up different from a lot of the spaces that I've been in, being a person of color, being someone who's openly queer, like I had different challenges where to me professionalism meant something different. So I always found other ways of doing the things that I needed to do to both accurately represent myself, but also to be able to like continue my momentum to getting opportunities. And I think that it's the network is that, right? So networking doesn't just mean talking to the person who's in charge, talking to the person who you think has the biggest title. It means like talking to anybody and everyone because people have knowledge to share. So for me, it's like, for example, when I found out that I got Fulbright, there was like a network of LGBTQ like Fulbrighters. So I jumped in there. And to me, that was networking. I was hearing about their experiences in certain spaces because that was important to what experience I was about to get into. Right. And while I was, so I think that that's just an example of like, it's not always about like, what can I, is this conversation going to get me a job or get me more money or get me into school, but more of like, you never know what you might need from people or how you might be able to, not even just for yourself, but how you might be able to help them. There's some things where I see opportunities and I think of, oh, I remember my friend in this thing mentioned this, and then I send those things to them, right? And I think it's just important to like build those connections, but then also not be afraid to like highlight them. Because I'm sure if any of you apply for a job where the person who's interviewing is a chef and was a chef intern, and they see that on your resume, they're going to be like, oh, more likely to give you an interview. I'm not going to deny that if I see Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Fulbright on someone's resume when they apply to a role at my organization, I am more likely to give them an interview because I know that there's certain things that go into being part of those programs.
So let me just see if I get this kind of, if I'm capturing this correctly.
Right.
So instead of maybe calling it networking, which is a scary word that kind of feels like business cards and
Right.
three-piece suits, if we called it seeking community while being kind of our authentic self. So,
Right.
so not trying to pretend I'm going to come in with my bad jokes, right? And I am going to admit how awkward I am trying to like make sure we connect on LinkedIn because that's just who I am. And those who have interviewed with me or other things will know that is just me. But being intentional about trying to create a community for SHEP alums or for my world where we can kind of support each other feels very different than networking. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I would say that that's accurate, right? It's like finding the people and the places and the things that best support who you are and professionally so that way you're able to, that will help you get that to the spaces. Ultimately, I'm at the place in my career that when I'm being interviewed for something, I am also interviewing them. Just because they're interviewing me doesn't mean that they have the power over how I'm going to act or behave, because I might find out from the interview, you know what, this isn't a good fit for me because whatever the organization shared doesn't align with where I'm at or what I want. And I think it's important, regardless of where you are in your career or in your education, that you look at the value that you bring to an organization and to a space that you're entering and hold yourself to that regard. And don't just think that you're like, I need to get this job, right? So sometimes a no is just like a redirection somewhere else.
All right. I did see a lot of smiles when I mentioned how awkward networking is. So I know
it is very awkward. I also hate it, but
well, and they're all about to go to a conference with people they've only seen on Zoom minus their cohort in Atlanta, and with speakers and in person, and get to know each other and sit on panels with each other, and you will have had this shared 8-week experience, but also have never actually met each other in person. So everyone's just going to be a little bit awkward.
Right.
So any questions? I have monopolized most of the questions. It can be about any of the programs, about life pieces,
Anything.
anything. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a lot of questions, but I think one that I will ask is essentially, what is next on your bingo card? Like, what are you looking forward to next? Are you looking for any other opportunities or?
So I would like to get a PhD. That is next, I think. And the funny part is when I was in grad school, I was like, I'm never doing this again. I'm like, I'm done with school because, grad school is challenging. I'm not going to lie. It's challenging regardless of how prepared you think you are or aren't. But I think now it's definitely a PhD because I also recognize that the world we work in and live in, like certain things are needed to be able to create certain opportunities or to enter in certain spaces or sit at certain tables. So for me, I want to continue to do the work that I'm doing and creating more opportunities for people who look like me or came from places like me. And I need to be there in order to do that. So I would say, yeah, my bingo card next is a PhD, hopefully somewhere nice.
Anybody else? Ooh, okay. Jack, you're pointing as if I know who you're pointing to. Because you're all in a different order. Is it Reagan? Is it Regan or Reagan?
It's Reagan.
Okay, just making sure. Reagan, go ahead.
Okay, so I am currently interning at a family shelter and I interact with the kids a lot, and I gotten a lot of feedback from them about the shelter and other things and how they run. So like my question for you is, what is some, I guess, advice you've gotten from the boys that you work with that you've used or you hope to use in the future to better the program or things that go along with the program?
I think definitely kind of like what I talked about a little earlier, which is like continuing to like listen to the voices of the people that we're claiming to serve, and to also create spaces for them to serve, to like share their opinions, right? So for example, something that we do both informally and formally is evaluations of our programming, evaluations of our teachers and all of that. And all of those, everything that we do as far as evaluations includes sections for our boys to give input. So if we're evaluating a teacher's work performance, a part of that is like asking the boys directly in their class, like what they think about, in certain different categories. But I would say definitely like having that reminder of like who the work is for. So I don't know specifically like what your example is, but I definitely think that is something that I've learned and that I kind of take with me regardless everywhere I go. Even when doing something like Peace Corps, to some people can feel a little icky because obviously there's like some colonial aspects to it. But I think for me it was important to like build the relationships with the community that I was working with. And not necessarily see myself as like, oh, I'm here to like change their lives or serve them, but instead I'm here to like interact with them and be part of their community. Like they're allowing me in. So I think it's always important. What I've learned is always important to show up and learn before deciding what you're doing. An example of something I do at Life Pieces with people, their first week and a half or sometimes 2 weeks of work, they don't do anything but shadow the program. Because in my opinion, yeah, I can write on a job description what I need somebody to be able to do, but there's certain things that I can't teach people. So I have to see like, how do you interact with the community we're with? And do you genuinely have that level of care and patience for the work? Because if you don't, then you won't be successful in it. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I came out.
It answered it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. I know Jack had a hand up. Did anybody else have a hand up? Jack, how we do Jack and then Parker? Does that work? Go ahead.
So you talk about with your job teaching just how to express yourself, how to be a gentleman, an athlete, and a scholar. And I just wanted to see some more maybe specific examples of what that looks like, or some common lessons you have.
Yeah, so we have, I'll put the website on here so you can see kind of what I'm talking about. So basically our curriculum is centered around what we called the human development system. And part of that is basically like what it means to be a life pieces man. And each of the sections, so like gentleman, scholar, artist, athlete, has like different things that go under it. And another thing we have is we have this like color wheel themed, trying to see if I can find one so I can show it to you. We have this like color wheel themed shield that we all wear that has different values around it. So every month we focus on a different value. I'm actually going to find it really quick. Give me just 1 second. I can show it to you guys.
While he's doing that, I put a link in for their kind of human development system. Under what we do, they go through a lot of that, but.
Okay, so basically we have this like shield, we called it the shield of faith. And we're not like a religiously affiliated organization, that's just what it's called. So basically it's inspired by the color wheel because of that root in art. But every month we focus on a different principle. So for example, in October we do discipline, November we do giving, and then we basically teach the boys different activities. So the curriculum I wrote is all about, so in October, there's 4 weeks worth of lesson plans or activities that they could do to talk about discipline. And we have our own definitions for each of the things. And that's kind of what I mean, where it's more of like a personal development type program than it is like we're not going to babysit them and play sports and just help them with their homework. So it's definitely when we're talking about being an athlete, it's not who's the best at soccer or basketball or whatever. It's talking about sportsmanship. It's talking about what it means to lose with grace and win with grace, what it means to be on a team, what it means to follow rules, and things like that. When we talk about being a gentleman, we're talking about not necessarily in the more traditional patriarchal way. We're talking more about like what it means to have manners and what it means to have respect for yourself, for your body, for other people, for your community, things like that. So it's definitely like not traditional definitions of things. But I would say if looking at the human development system, you'll see kind of more, but it's definitely really unique. And a lot of our staff ends up, and myself too, end up applying it to your own life. And you're just kind of like one of the things we have is a premise, and our premise is love plus security plus expression. Love plus security and expression equals love. No life, no security, no expression equals death. So we talk about the concept of death as not like literally being dead, but like being dead inside, because you don't have security, you don't have love, you don't have expression, which unfortunately so often Black and brown men don't have, right? So, and you would think some of these concepts on there, you're like, they're so difficult. How do you teach them to 3-year-olds? And you'd be surprised. Kids are able to understand more than we sometimes want to give them credit for.
Sometimes are the 3-year-olds easier to understand than the 13-year-olds?
100%. Because the 3-year-olds will take a concept and ponder, and you know what, maybe we do it through a drawing, or we do it through some kind of like game, where like a 13-year-old will sit there and want to debate every single thing, which is also great because we want to teach them the concept of debating and advocating for themselves, and not necessarily going everywhere and just doing what as you're told, but going places, understanding why you're told to do what you're being told to do, and recognizing that you should do it not because you're being told, but because that's the right thing to do.
Great. Those links are in there if you want to dig in a little bit more. Parker, did you have a question?
Yeah, so the words that y'all are helping out, since y'all have been around, what you said, for around 27. So have you been able to see any difference in how those words have been? Like, has there been any change? And can you like associate any change from life pieces to masterpieces?
In the community, you're saying, like in Ward 7 and 8. So obviously I have, 3-year perspective of things. But I would say the one thing, and there's thousands of people that live in this part of the city. I would say definitely what there is a recognition of what Life Pieces is, and what it means to be part of Life Pieces, and the network of Life Pieces just continues to grow because they've served over 2,000 boys and young men over their 27 years. So obviously one organization is not going to be able to change everything, but it is kind of like adding those drops in the right place of like the kind of work that should be done and deserves to be done. And the goal for us is to continue to expand, to continue to support programs that are doing work similar to ours, because that's another thing that could happen in not just the nonprofit world, but in a lot of spaces, is this view of competition. And we personally don't view other nonprofits as like, oh, this is competition. If anything, we welcome more spaces that are creating this type of work, or creating these types of services and opportunities for the youth that we serve. Especially because we don't have, our program is all boys and young men. So of course we want there to be more programs that serve girls too and other people. But I don't know if that answered your question, but basically we've been around, people know who we are, and we're doing our best to continue to bring more space and opportunity for other people.
Parker, I think you hit kind of a nail on the head of one of the hard things about doing frontline work, as you can quantify sometimes the number of interactions, you can have anecdotal stories on things, but it's really hard to kind of draw a causal relationship between an intervention or a relationship and another thing, because each person has so many different interactions and relationships, and maybe because of something in one program they're more open to another program, and
Right.
It's the beauty of the work, but it's also one of the difficulties in nonprofit work to kind of say, like, because of this thing happened.
Right. And
so-
it's right. And I would say that, of course, I could sit here and, give you individualized success stories because those exist. But that I would just say those are results not just of our organization, but of those boys and young men getting the opportunities that they deserved. Right. And I look at the work in Samoa that I did in Peace Corps kind of similar, where it's not like, oh, I think that, the 2 years that I taught at that elementary school changed the boys and girls forever? No. But do I think that I helped them expand the worldview because I was somebody that they had never interacted with, someone like me? I showed them things that they had never saw. Yeah, I expanded the worldview, and hopefully that was a step in a direction where they're able to get something more out of it. But that's just kind of like the day-to-day of the work that I do now too. I'm hoping that what I'm doing is creating, giving them tools to be able to get more out of it. But ultimately, like, some things you just kind of have to wait and see.
Hopefully that was a completely rewarding answer for you to say. It's impossible to know.
Right.
But the flip side is that it is still data driven, that, taking what we do know and putting it back into the curriculum and doing kind of not just kind of guessing. So it's
Right.
this weird tension where we don't know for sure, but we're trying to use the best data we can to have the most effective programming. It sounds like they don't go together, but they do.
They do.
They do.
Especially
like I'm making it up, but
and then in the nonprofit world, just to add, a lot of what we do is also dependent on like what the people who are giving grants or money or funds want to see, right? So obviously STEM has been another something that's become more and more part of a conversation, and Life Pieces, we implemented it more now because it does open more avenues of funds, because people want to see STEM being done with youth. So that is why we hired, and that opened up opportunities for people to get hired that are experts in STEM, or teachers that teach STEM. So it just creates more opportunities for us to bring in those people that have those experiences, where normally we would just be looking for people with arts experiences or people who have worked with boys and things like that.
And often the funders are looking at trends or where they like, they're not just kind of throwing in a dart. The best
Right.
funders are looking at like, what are the job opportunities going down? So getting people into STEM now will open up job opportunities. So the best funders aren't just kind of picking their personal passions and kind of hoping people
Right.
follow it. So it's a messy mess. Any last questions before we hit 8 o'clock?
I had one more question about the color wheel. So I'm on the website, but I saw that y'all have spiritual principles and meditation,
Mhm.
and I just wanted to ask how that has been and how y'all have implemented those to your
Right.
practices.
So spiritual principles is used as a way to talk about like different types of religions. So not necessarily just because, like I mentioned, we're not specific to one religion. We don't do holidays at Life Pieces. So we do seasons. So we'll do like, winter, spring, fall, summer type things, but we don't celebrate Christmas. We don't celebrate things, Valentine's Day, Halloween's, because we're trying to create more of like a blank template for them to take the information we're giving them and then be able to eventually make their own choices. But with spiritual principles, we teach them about different types of religions around the world and in DC and things like that. But then we also use the conversation as a way of like, how do you decide what's right from wrong? How do you make moral decisions and things like that? So for our older boys, we definitely do a lot of skits with like moral dilemmas and how do you decide this over that. And with the younger kids, we might play or do activities where it's like, one of the ones that I like, it's like everyone stands in the center and we say, okay, if you would take $1 from your mom's purse, walk this way. If you wouldn't, walk that way. And then you're seeing those little examples of things like if you had a piece of candy, would you share it with your friend? Yes or no? And seeing how even little kids are already thinking of like, well, how did you decide yes or no? So that's kind of how we do spiritual principles. Meditation is something that we do actually regularly. So they meditate at the beginning of every day. And then we also, even when we do like our parent orientations or parent activities, we start with the meditation just to kind of use it as an opportunity to like center and to reflect. And when it's meditation month, which is January, right after the holiday break, then we use it as an opportunity to reflect on like what you did with your families, what did you learn, things like that. And then just giving them into the habit of like knowing, for example, in all of our classrooms, instead of having like an area where, we don't sit people to like facing the wall, we don't send them in the hallway, we don't like put them in a corner or anything. We actually have, every classroom has a meditation center that has like pillows and a nice rug and a notepad with pens, or sometimes for the little kids coloring pages. And it's like, okay, you don't seem like you're yourself fully today, so let's let you sit in the meditation center, and they pick what kind of tool they want to use to kind of process whatever they're dealing with. And then when they're ready, they'll come back and they'll say, okay, I'm ready to be part of the class again. And then they're part of the class again. So it's just using those little things, tools, to help them better process some of those emotions from a young age.
That's a great question. All right, so it is 8 o'clock and I want to be respectful. So thank you so much, Juan, for coming and talking to us about the kind of this array of things. So that is it for tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me. And yeah, definitely still, I'm part of your network now. So if you have my information. If you guys have any questions or want any help with anything related to Peace Corps, Fulbright, AmeriCorps, nonprofits, if you live in DC and you're interested in volunteering with Life Pieces to Masterpieces, let me know, because that's another thing we constantly welcome is people who want to volunteer for one day, for half a day, whatever. But yeah, thank you all for having me and for asking all the questions you asked, and I wish you all luck.
Thank you.